In the cold waters of the Pacific Ocean, just 125 miles from the shore of San Francisco, a rocky island rises from the mist. Today, millions know it as a tourist attraction. Photographers capture its crumbling walls at sunset. Boats circle its docks daily. But long before it became a historic site, Alcatraz Island was a symbol of fear, isolation. The story of Alcatraz begins long before it became a prison. In 1775, Spanish explorer Juan Manuel de Ayala sailed into San Francisco Bay and named the island La Isla de los Alcatraces, meaning Island of the Pelicans. For decades, it remained largely undeveloped, windswept, isolated, and surrounded by powerful currents. Its natural isolation would later become its greatest asset. After California became part of the United States in 1850, the U.S. government quickly realized the island's strategic value. With the California gold rush bringing rapid growth to San Francisco, the bay needed protection. Alcatraz was transformed into a military fortress. Cannons were installed. Fortifications were built. By the late 1850s, it became one of the most heavily fortified military sites on the West Coast. Not long after, the island took on a new role. During the Civil War, Alcatraz began holding military prisoners. Soldiers accused of desertion and Confederate sympathizers were confined there. Its isolation made it ideal for detention. Escape was nearly impossible, not because of walls alone, but because of the freezing water and dangerous currents that surrounded it. By the early 20th century, the military prison expanded. Concrete cell houses replaced earlier wooden structures. The island operated as a disciplinary barracks for soldiers who broke rules. Life was strict, structured, and silent. Yet this was only the beginning of Alcatraz's most famous chapter. In 1934, during the height of organized crime in America, the U.S. Department of Justice took control of the island. The government wanted a prison that could hold the most dangerous and escape-prone criminals, men who caused trouble in other federal prisons. Alcatraz became a maximum security federal penitentiary. Its purpose was not rehabilitation, it was control. The new prison had 336 cells, each measured roughly 5 by 9 feet, a small cot, a fold-down shelf desk, a sink with cold running water, a toilet. Nothing more. Silence was enforced. Discipline was absolute. Privileges were minimal. Prisoners earned basic rights like music or library access through good behavior. Among the inmates was the infamous Chicago gangster Al Capone. Once one of the most powerful crime bosses in America, Capone found himself stripped of influence inside Alcatraz. There were no special treatments, no bribes, no power. He spent his days doing laundry and playing banjo in the prison band before illness weakened him. Another notorious prisoner was George Kelly, known as Machine Gun Kelly. Then there was Robert Stroud, often called the Birdman of Alcatraz. Despite the nickname, Stroud did not keep birds on Alcatraz itself, though he had studied birds earlier while imprisoned elsewhere. On the island, he lived much of his time in isolation. Daily life followed a strict routine. Wake up at town, breakfast in silence. Assigned labor such as kitchen duty, laundry work, or maintenance. Lunch, more work, dinner. Evening count, lights out. The rule was simple: you were entitled to food, clothing, shelter, and medical care. Everything else was a privilege. Yet despite the heavy security, escape attempts became part of Alcatraz legend. Officially, 36 men attempted to escape in 14 separate attempts between 1934 and 1963. Most were caught, some were shot, others drowned. The most famous escape occurred in June 1962. 3 inmates, Frank Morris and brothers John Anglin and Clarence Anglin, devised a plan that stunned authorities. Using stolen spoons, they chipped away at the ventilation grates in their cells. They created dummy heads from soap, toothpaste, and toilet paper to fool guards during night checks. For months, they worked in secret. On the night of June 11, 1962, they climbed through the holes, crawled through a utility corridor, reached the roof, and slid down a kitchen pipe. From raincoats stitched together, they built a makeshift raft. Then they disappeared into the darkness of San Francisco Bay. The next morning, the dummy heads were discovered. An intense manhunt followed. Officially, the FBI concluded the men likely drowned, but no bodies were ever found. Decades later, the mystery remains unsolved, fueling books, documentaries, and the 1979 film Escape from Alcatraz starring Clint Eastwood. By the early 1960s, Alcatraz was becoming too expensive to operate. Everything from food to fuel had to be transported by boat. Infrastructure was deteriorating due to constant exposure to salt air. In 1963, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy ordered the prison closed. After 29 years as a federal penitentiary, Alcatraz's era as the Rock came to an end. But the island's story did not stop there. In 1969, a new chapter began. A group of Native American activists occupied Alcatraz Island, citing an old treaty that allowed them to claim and used federal land. The occupation lasted 19 months. It drew national attention to indigenous rights and became a powerful symbol of protest during a turbulent era in American history. Eventually, the occupation ended peacefully in 1971, soon after Alcatraz became part of the newly created Golden Gate National Recreation Area. The National Park Service took control, preserving the island as a historic landmark. Today, visitors can walk through the same cell house corridors where America's most notorious criminals once stood for count. They can step inside solitary confinement. They can see the recreation yard overlooking the skyline of San Francisco, a constant reminder of freedom just beyond reach. Ironically, what once made Alcatraz terrifying is what now makes it fascinating. Its isolation, its mystery, its stories of power, punishment, and resistance. Was it truly escape-proof? Possibly not. Was it America's harshest prison? Some former inmates claimed it was strict but not brutal, clean, structured, and predictable. Yet psychologically, its isolation broke many men. Alcatraz represents more than a prison. It represents an era in American history when the federal government wanted to send a message to organized crime, when discipline was prioritized over rehabilitation, when an island surrounded by freezing water became the ultimate symbol of no way out. And yet, standing there today, with seagulls circling overhead and tourists taking photographs, it's hard to imagine the fear that once filled those narrow cells. The wind still blows across the island. The tide still crashes against its rocks. The lighthouse still stands watch. But the prisoners are gone. What remains is history, layered, complicated, and unforgettable. From military fortress to federal prison, from abandoned ruin to symbol of protest, from place of punishment to world-famous landmark, Alcatraz Island is not just a rock in the bay. It is a story of power, defiance, mystery, and the thin line between captivity and freedom.